Hello and welcome to Klig's Kitchen here at Yarra Valley in Australia. So today we'll be making a soup dish, and very simple, elegant, and a lot of different variations on it. It requires only 3 main vegetable ingredients. We've got zucchini, potatoes, and I use the wambak. And this is the Chinese cabbage. This is my go-to vegetable in any main savory dish because I really like the consistency. I don't eat onions and garlic, so this is a very able substitute for the onion. And this is my go-to, which is called asafoetida or hing, to substitute for the garlic flavor. So in this dish, it's a French dish, a basic peasant French dish. It's actually meant to be with cabbage, but because zucchini is now coming into season, I've chosen to use the dish with zucchini. You can do it straight with the cabbage and the potato, and then in that case, you'll just substitute the amount of cabbage for zucchini. And you can also do it without the cabbage at all, but it really does give it a much better flavor if you use the zucchini. So another couple of points is the dairy-free alternative. I mostly will use a neutral oil. Today I'm using grapeseed oil. Use a neutral oil, neutral meaning not a strong flavor, for sauteing the vegetables. I use a little bit of the dairy-free alternative just to add at the end, to add some flavor and also some body to the soup. So before we begin, I'd like to point out the importance of stabilizing your cutting board. So I use just a piece of this foam. So first I'll show you. Here you can see how easily my board is shifting. As the board shifts, the food is going to be moving from your board, which is disconcerting. So now the board is stabilized. So anytime that I'm cutting, the food is staying just on the board. So I can move the food around as I wish. So the food isn't moving away from me. I'm not chasing my food. Okay, so let's get started. So first thing I do is to cut my my wambak, and what I do is I keep these scraps in a separate place for making soup stock. It adds a lot of flavor. Generally, I cut a wedge out of the top and then use the top of the Chinese cabbage for other purposes. So today I could put it for the salad or whatever. This dish, because it's going to be green anyway from the zucchini, I can actually use the whole, but I'm going to choose to use it for a salad as well. So just start cutting your vegetables. You want it, it's going to be a pureed soup, so you don't need to cut it this thin. If you'd like to have a little more texture in your soup, then you can cut it about this big. And let's see, I'm serving about 8 portions, so I'd say probably four good pieces. These are a little bit small, so I'll probably end up using 6. As I said, you can leave a little bit of the green on because it's going to be a greenish tinge to the soup anyway. And into the pot. Now, for the potatoes, We're lucky here at the Yarra Valley Living Center because we have access to a lot of really reasonably priced organic vegetables. So these are organic potatoes, so I'm going to leave the skin on and just chop rough. It's called a rough chop. Doesn't really matter the size. It can be a little bit on the big size is okay. Just because of efficiency, I like to make it a little bit on the smaller side because then it takes a little less time for the cooking process. And if you square your vegetables, so here we have a round potato. If I do what's called squaring the vegetables, it has a twofold purpose. One, it stabilizes the vegetable. So it doesn't matter which way I cut it, stable, but of course if you broader the base, then easier, the more stable you're going to have. So stabilizes it, and also your pieces end up being uniform, which really expedites the cooking process. And for the zucchini, again for the ends, I'll keep them, put them in my soup stock. So the end product today is going to be a little bit more on the earthy side. If I was making a special effort for guests that were coming, who are not so familiar with, say, the local kind of peasant food, then I would peel the vegetables. Also, there's some people who I happen to know who just really don't prefer to leave the peel on. So in that case, if I know that, then I would just take the peeling off. But in any case, the peeling is going to definitely be going into the soup stock. I won't really require the soup stock today, depending. I have some on hand if I need it at the end to thin it out if I need to thin it. But because the potato is so rich in flavor, I really won't need to add any vegetable stock for this. So the zucchini, I've just cut it in half lengthwise, and then I'll cut it again probably in about 3, and then again just a rough chop like that. So now we've just put in a little bit of oil in the bottom of the pan and start to saute the cabbage, or if you're using onion, saute the onion. The important part here about the onion is that you want to make sure that, number one, it doesn't get too brown, and that you've put in after it started to saute a little bit, then you put in the acetate. And I just measure according to how inside the cap. It's always better to measure away from your product, so I usually measure it into the cap. So I would say for about 8 people, I would probably put in less than a half a teaspoon of acetate or hing. So as long as your onion and your cabbage is not brown, then at that point, just when it's nice and translucent, as they say, then you can add in your potatoes and zucchini. Just give it a little, maybe probably just a minute, and then you're going to put a little water on top, not even covering the vegetables. So just cover it up, let it go for about 10 minutes or so, and just give the potatoes a little poke. They should be nice and soft, and then we're going to puree it with the handheld immersion blender. Very versatile in the kitchen, and I'd really recommend that you get a good quality one, so at least minimum of 500 watts. Now this dish is going to be a side dish. If you'd like to have this dish as a main meal, then just add some fava beans or cannellini beans, and you can add them directly from the can. as long as the ingredient list says that it's only water and salt and beans, then you can actually add that water if you want to your soup. And because you've only added a little bit of water on the top, just enough to cook the potatoes in, then you will definitely need to add more of the liquid. So this is good. Don't throw it out, just leave it on the side. The other thing about adding this particular kind of a bean, the white bean, is it will add a more neutral flavor to the soup, so it's not going to overpower the soup. So that would be the fava or the cannellini, or even you could use a white bean if you could get that product in the supermarket. These are handy because they come from an Italian grocer. The thing about the liquid is you can also save it as an egg replacement. I use it all the time now that I've found it. It's my favorite go-to egg replacer because it works all the time. It's called aquafaba. So we're going to add some fresh rosemary to our dish at the end of the cooking process. And it's really important, if you have fresh herbs, to use them at the end of the cooking process. The general rule of thumb is 1 dry equals 3 fresh. So if your recipe will call for a tablespoon of fresh rosemary, that means you use a teaspoon of the dry. So we're just going to cut the rosemary up, then you're going to add it in. And because it's adding at the end and it's not being cooked down, I would recommend to cut the rosemary fairly fine. So that's about the consistency that we want. We've tested the potatoes. They are knife tender or fork tender, as they say. Now we're going to just use the hand immersion blender and just puree it. Be careful when you're first putting it in because it may splatter up. And as I said before, if you prefer it to be still a little bit of pieces coming in, then this is probably about what you have. So we have some chunks of the zucchini, a little bit of potato. Personally, I like it to be fully pureed, so we'll continue on. And really, if you can, the best is to get the kind of hand immersion blenders that come apart easily. Otherwise, it's really messy process. So there we have it. The product is just about finished, and so last little taste test before we taste test. So we're going to put in a little bit of our dairy-free, maybe a tablespoon or so. The pot is almost a little over half full. And a little bit of salt. And again, I only use my fingers according to how much is in the pot. And I always like to use a little bit of the black pepper. Or you can use the cracked black, which is preferred. However, because of the dish color, I prefer to use the white pepper. So if something is like a light green or a whitish color, then I prefer to use the white pepper. However, if pepper is one of the ingredients that you want to stand out, then most definitely use the cracked black pepper. And then finally, we're going to add the fresh rosemary on the top. And the benefit of the fresh rosemary is that it adds micronutrients to your dish. And any fresh herb or green will add flavor and also add micronutrients to the dish because you're not cooking. And that's the other important point about why we add the fresh chopped herbs and greens at the end. My dairy alternative that I'm choosing today is to thin it out a bit, is going to be unsweetened almond milk. Best is if you can get the unsweetened almond milk or any of the nut milks, oat milks, without any added oil to it. So just a little bit there. Spoon over there. And just that. This part is totally to your taste, so, and your preference for the texture. I like mine to be a little bit more on the thicker side, so I won't be adding too much of the milk. That's about how I like it, about that thick. So now I'm just going to have a little taste before I serve it. So you're checking for all of the flavors are there. Nothing is predominant, not too potatoey, not too much zucchini. The rosemary is just right, and the not too predominant. And so everything is just there. I don't even need to add a little more salt. If the guests would like to add more salt, then you just provide it on the table. So now we're ready to put it in the bowl and serve it to our guests. And I'd like to probably put fresh rosemary sprigs that we can use. So we'll just put this in. It just adds that extra little bit to your presentation for your guests. So there we are, zucchini and potato soup. Also, another special feature, and that is that you can, if it's very warm in the summer, very hot actually in the summer, then you can use it as a cold dish as well. It works very well. And in that sense, then what I would do is I would replace the rosemary with fresh dill. Awesome. See you next time, and welcome again to our Yarra Valley Living Center, Klig's Kitchen, where the food is nutritious, thoughtful, and delicious.